Hello and welcome to Seminary Reacts. I'm the host Amy, and today as our guest we have Janeen Bertsche Johnson. She has a lot of roles on campus here at AMBS. She's the campus pastor, admissions counselor, alumni director, and she's part of the Core Adjunct Faculty. And one thing Janeen and I have in common is that we both just graduated, me with my Master of Divinity and Janeen with the Doctor of Ministry. And it's such a great opportunity to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about your passions and just some things you care about and some of the work that you've done?
Sure. Well, one of my passions is developing new leaders. So I see all of my jobs as part of that work. I'm at the stage of life now where being able to encourage other people to take on leadership is really important to me. Personally, one of my passions is singing. I sing in a couple of choirs. I love that. And my husband and I like to travel, and we especially enjoy seeing waterfalls and covered bridges and Dambo trolls, which are these huge trolls made out of recycled wood by a Norwegian artist named Thomas Dambo. And so we enjoy traveling different places to find these things, and I also enjoy a lot of time with my grandsons. That's really important to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we dive into what we have from Reddit today, could you talk about your Reddit experience up to this point?
I actually learned about Reddit from you, watching some of the episodes of this podcast and being like, oh, this is really cool. This is a place where people can ask these questions that maybe used to, like, in what I remember is like newspaper columns, Dear Abby, those kinds of things. But with a little more specificity, people can ask, depending on where they go on Reddit, questions about a specific topic they're interested in. And I think that's really neat. So I did not know much about it before your podcast started.
Well, that's awesome. I love introducing people to Reddit. Are you ready to dive into our first question? So the questions today are actually coming from a more diverse set of subreddits. A lot of the time I'm pulling these questions from the subreddit Christianity, but we have some others that we're pulling in today. This first one does come from the subreddit Christianity, and the title is Worship Doesn't Do Much for Me. Every Tuesday, I go to high school ministry, and every time I dread worship. They play really long, repetitive songs that are 6 minutes or more in length, and I try to sing, extend my arms, and feel the Spirit, but I just feel like I'm convincing myself to feel something. When the pastor speaks, when I read the Bible, when I'm in life groups, or when I'm praying, I usually feel the Holy Spirit, but with worship, I don't. I don't even want to go to church tonight, because I know I'm going to be standing up for a total of 30 minutes doing something that doesn't feel productive in my relationship with God. And so this post is just asking for help from people on this subreddit, just asking how do I feel the Spirit here? How do I address this? How should I be responding to this? And figuring out how I should be worshiping.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. The first thing that came to my mind as you were reading that was that there are many different forms of worship. And so what I hear described there, I would characterize as maybe an enthusiast form of worship, where the raising of the hands is important, the repetitive songs that are meant to create an emotional response. And if somebody's not feeling that, what's wrong with me? Kind of, that's the sense of the post that I get. And one of the things that I teach here is the concept that there are many pathways in which we can encounter God. And so to be able to think about a multitude of different ways that different people encounter God. And that can be because of our personality type. It can be because of our experiences, how we were raised, like what we were told was a good way to worship or not a good way to worship. But it can also have to do with experiences like when have we encountered God that we didn't try to make it happen? And then we find out that, oh, this was really meaningful to me. So I encourage people to think about a multitude of options for encountering God, and then to build on those, what Gary Thomas calls sacred pathways, to build on the pathways that work well for us, and to not disparage the ones that don't work as well for us, to understand that there doesn't need to be a right and a wrong way. That each of us will have maybe 4 or 5 of those pathways that really feel more comfortable to us, and maybe 1 or 2 that don't feel comfortable to us at all. But the more we can expand our different experiences, the more we can both understand other people that are important to us, or to actually grow in our own encounters with God, because we never know. God can surprise us. For example, one of the pathways that's really important to me is the intellectual pathway. And so I encounter God in ideas and aha moments, and I can get like tingles when I find a new understanding of faith through my mind, through thinking. And that feels very much like an encounter with God for me. Another way I encounter God is through the naturalist pathway. And when I'm out in nature, I'm a master naturalist, so I care deeply about nature. I love telling people about the prairie here at AMBS, for example. I love teaching classes on trees and a class on water. But when I'm out in nature, I can sense God's presence, God's creativity, God's power, majesty, and attention to detail. All of those things help me to encounter God. I also encounter God in the community. When we are gathered together, when we're maybe discerning together, when we're serving together, I can encounter God when I'm making music, when I'm singing. I often just feel transported to a different place. And so Gary Thomas lists 9 different pathways. I've added 2 more to that. And I think other people could add some as well. But to not think that there's only one right way to worship will maybe free this person to maybe explore a different style of worship. Maybe the enthusiast style is just not what's going to work for them well. And it's neat that they still see that maybe this does say something to someone else, but it doesn't have to be your own way, and there's nothing wrong with you if that doesn't work well for you. And by all means, find something that does work, and find a pathway in which you encounter God. That's what I would say to this person.
Yeah. So, really encouraging this person to say, like, hey, there's nothing wrong with you if you feel like you're not getting something out of this form of worship. But, they talk about how they get a lot from reading the Bible, from being in life groups, being in prayer. And so, it's not that they're experiencing this blockage of experiencing God at all. It's just they've kind of already found what's most meaningful to them.
Right.
And, they can lean into that and not experience guilt for not being able to experience it in in one of the ways that other people tend to with music and
Right. And they might find another form of worship, like a more liturgical worship, to be really meaningful to them. They might find outdoor worship really meaningful to them. You try a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I also like what you said about kind of the communal aspect, in that maybe they are not feeling the Spirit in this form of worship with the repetitive songs, but they can have some appreciation that other people are experiencing it in that way. And so, being in community and experiencing other forms of worship with other people is also meaningful because it's connecting them with the people around them, and also recognizing like, okay, I might not be feeling this, but I'm so glad that you're experiencing God in this way, and that's really beautiful too.
Yeah. So the main thing I get out of this understanding is that the only pitfall is to believe that there's only one way.
Right.
That all of them can be beautiful, and we can embrace the fact that we have different experiences of God. And we see this in the Bible. I mean, I have placed a psalm with each one of these 11 pathways, a psalm that expresses that pathway. So I see just in that book of prayer, there are all these different ways. Some people are more contemplative. When I was a young adult, contemplative prayer did not work for me at all. And I still struggle with it because my mind races a lot. But as I've gotten older, I love the sense of quieting myself, and silence is much more meaningful to me now. So we even change over time. What worked for us at one point or didn't work for us might change.
Yeah. And then the one other question I have about this post, this person goes a lot into talking about what they're feeling during worship. So feeling the Spirit, saying they're not feeling the Spirit. And I was just wondering, like, I know that there are a lot of diverse ways of describing that, what feeling the Spirit is like. But I've also seen a lot of conversation about worship online about, like, is worship based on a feeling? Is connecting with God based on a specific feeling? Because a lot of people will go about these different worship practices and they're looking for a specific type of feeling. And that's kind of hard to describe. And I mean, some say that's also kind of an irresponsible way to approach worshiping God or trying to experience time with God as a specific feeling. So I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I do think that the main point of worship is giving our devotion to God. And what happens to us is the secondary part of that. And it might be a feeling, but it might not. It might be a sense of joining my story, my praise, to that of others. And the main point is not whether I am moved emotionally or not. If we start focusing too much on the emotions, then leading worship can become kind of manipulative. Like, you know, good worship leaders, you and I have done a lot of worship leading, and good worship leaders kind of know what you can do to help people move towards feeling responses. And that's okay, because we do want people to encounter God and we hope that something in them will move. But it can also become too much like a way of manipulating a particular kind of response. And then you get people feeling like, what's wrong with me? I didn't feel what everyone around me seems to be feeling. And I don't ever want people to feel that way when I'm leading worship. I want people to come away saying, we gathered here, we joined together in praising God, and that was important for us to do. And what happened to me is secondary.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point to make, like the way that that leading can be manipulative if you're really leaning into the feelings of that a lot. And I mean, there's lots of examples of people who are like, especially like this person talks about how they don't necessarily experience the Spirit of God, feel the Spirit of God while they're doing the worship songs. But I mean, that's one way that some would argue is manipulative, is when those repetitive songs are used and music is used and it's done. And some consider that to be manipulative because music is powerful. And yeah, I mean, that's really playing into the feeling of it. So yeah, I mean, it is important to recognize like the different ways that we are worshiping God as a form of devotion. And we don't necessarily need to identify like a feeling like this person is for it to be considered worship.
Yeah. And as worship leaders, I think it's important for us to also pay attention to what are the variety of approaches that we're using that might touch people who have different approaches.
Yes.
So where in our worship life together, maybe not every time we worship, but where are those moments of silence for the people who need a more contemplative approach? Where are those actions or calls to action that meet the people who have more of an activist kind of faith?
Right.
Where are the places where we sit with the people who are hurting, which is a caregiving approach, that kind of pathway, the people who encounter God when they are caring for others. So how can we include these various approaches? For the traditionalist, it might be the rhythms of prayer that come from the ancient church. No church can do it all.
Right.
But we can think about, are there many different approaches that we're using?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, are you ready for our next question? So this one is also coming from the subreddit Christianity. And the question is, does shame have any place in the way the church should function? And there's not anything more to the post, it's just the person asking the question. But I wanted to read some of the comments on this post just to give kind of a perspective on what different people on Reddit have said about that question. So again, the question is, does shame have any place in the way the church should function? So the first commenter says, shame as an inward experience that leads us to repentance? Definitely. Shame as an action used to put down others? Absolutely not. The second comment says, depends. If you mean shame as in negative messages that center on the person rather than their actions, no. Guilt is proper negative emotions you have when you do something wrong. Shame is excessive negative emotions and focuses on you. For example, you'll never stop, God can't fix you, you will never get better, etc. And the last comment I'll read says, I would say godly sorrow does have a place in the way the church functions, but I don't think shame does. I personally associate shame with pride. So I know you've done a lot of work with shame as a part of your doctoral work. So I was very curious to hear from you, for one thing, what the answer to this question, you would say the answer to this question is, but also just a bit of a response to some of the other ways that commenters have interpreted shame compared to some of the work that you've been doing with the topic.
Oh my goodness, that's so amazing because it just, it's like flashback to my dissertation. So in my research, I was researching how people, particularly pastors, healed from an experience of shame. And the specific experience that I was studying was the difficult ending of a ministry that was not due to misconduct. So something fell apart in their pastoral work and they left their ministry setting with that sense of maybe like failure or something like that caused shame. And how did they heal from that? And my goal in studying that was to be able to help people, especially pastors who are experiencing some kind of situation of shame, to be able to heal from it enough to go back into ministry and not be carrying those wounds. So that was kind of the big picture of what I was looking at. And in that reading that I was doing, I was just so struck by these arguments about whether shame is always a bad thing or not. And so the earlier things I was looking at were saying that there is a role for healthy shame in kind of like creating guardrails for your behavior, because you might not do something that's inappropriate thinking about how people would view you if you did that, or how you would view yourself if you did that. And then everyone kind of agreed that chronic, severe shame, what I was calling like dispositional shame, is not a good thing. That is really unhealthy. And there was a point in time especially with Brene Brown's work, where the researchers started to say there's no healthy shame. And they really were arguing that we should try to eradicate shame from our lives. More recently, the pendulum has swung back, and I actually read a book called For Shame, which was arguing that there is a healthy kind of shame that we don't need to be afraid of, that it's part of how we're socialized to behave well and to treat people well. And that what we need to instead worry about is the shaming of others. So the first two responses, I would say amen and amen. I would agree that we have to be really careful about what kind of chronic shame people carry, because it can be really damaging. But if it's not severe, if it's just like this awareness that, oh, if I behave this way, that's not who I want to be, or that's something I don't want to be, that kind of shame, it's an internal thing. We don't have to worry about like getting rid of that completely. What we need to be careful about is how do we help people who have chronic shame that's so severe that they feel like they're never going to be enough and can't be forgiven and all of those things. So that would be one part of the answer. And then in terms of the question was, is there a place for in the church?
Yes.
So then you get into some really interesting stuff about how is church discipline handled? Because in the past, there are just these horror stories about how people were shamed publicly for certain sins. Not all sins, but certain sins. And I still hear these stories from people who remember this happening in a congregation they were part of. And one, public shaming rarely changes behavior. And the potential, it can leave incredibly deep scars on people. So I would agree the church should never be about public shaming. So yeah, the addition of is there a place for this in the church is what makes this question really tricky, I think. Because it kind of sounds like what we're talking about is the role of shaming. When it becomes a corporate thing like that. So what I do think the church can be about is to know, and I said this in my dissertation, was we've got to be aware of how many people carry burdens of shame, and then how can we have a shame-informed ministry that is like watching for signs of that and helping people heal from it. So that's where I think the church does have a role, is in the lifting of shame and the healing of shame. And one of the things that I learned in this process was that often in an honor shame culture especially, shame is lifted by the pronouncement of someone with greater honor. And so we see this again and again in the Bible. We all know the story of the prodigal son. That is really a common story. And we think about the shame that son had. More recently, more recently, biblical scholars have pointed out that the older son also had some issues, right? That they weren't necessarily also righteous as well. But what I learned in this process was that the father in this story does incredibly shame-filled things. No respectable father in that culture would have given half the inheritance to the younger son. Like, that was an insult to the father to even ask. And so for the father to do that would have created shame. And then for the father to run to greet the son and embrace him and give him a party and all of that, those were actions. We think of that as loving acceptance, but they actually were actions that in that culture would have put shame on the father.
Wow.
So the father comes to the point of shame in order to lift the son and the older son as well out of shame. And that just helped me understand all of this in such a new way. How do we help lift the shame of other people? And part of it is pronouncing to them, we take your shame away. You are released.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. Yeah. I mean, especially like recognizing the taking on of shame that was done by the father, and probably, I mean, this sense of humility that we really need to be showing as the church. And when we're empowering people who have experienced shame, that's very, very powerful.
And it makes sense then about the Christ hymn as well, that even though Jesus was in the form of God, Jesus emptied himself and took on the form of a slave. In the Greek, it's a slave, and humbled himself even to the point of death on a cross. And death on a cross was the most shameful kind of death possible. And so Jesus, the whole work of salvation is Jesus taking shame on so that we can be lifted from it. And this is the work of God. God is about lifting shame. And wow, once I understood that, it just added this richness to the whole sense of what's the ministry about, right? What's our role as fellow Christians about? How can we help lift one another's shame?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to go back to what you said about, really thinking about whether or not shame can be healthy or not. And I'll say, like, when I was in undergrad, Brene Brown was greatly celebrated. And so, of course, like, in so much of the conversations we had about shame there was very much an emphasis that shame was a bad thing. And when I came to seminary here, there were some conversations we had about shame, and I remember hearing from other students about other cultures and how shame is used there, and how I really had to then wrestle with, like, okay, so a lot of what I've learned before about shame is so negative, and really consider, like, is there a space for that? And it's really interesting to think about. So I'm curious, again, going back to this question, in the work you've done, kind of looking at, like, potentially what healthy shame could be, what would you see that looking like in a church? Like, you mentioned about, like, church discipline, and you've mentioned that public shaming is not the way to do that. But how would you see healthy shame used in a church setting?
Ooh. I wish I knew. I think when we really trust one another, and when we have maybe a small group where we have been able to be open with one another. For example, I'm in a group of, it's now 5 women, that meets monthly. And we've shared enough of our lives with one another that it feels safe to use that space to talk about things that I'm struggling with. And I can trust them to both hold that tenderly, but also to some way communicate, you're okay. You know, like, you are still a beloved child of God. And so I think, especially coming out of for me, a Mennonite tradition, but many Protestants, we don't have places where we can confess to another person the way the Roman Catholic tradition has, where if you can confess your sin and receive a non-judgmental response. Brene Brown has done wonderful work on how you name shame, and that is the way to lift it. So where can the church provide those places where we can say both the shame that comes from something we've done wrong, but also the shame we carry that comes from our culture or the expectations on us that we can never live up to those expectations or whatever. I mean, Brene Brown has outlined the ways that shame affects us because of our cultural background and the community expectations. So she has done incredible work, both helping us understand that shame is not necessarily a direct correlation with something we did, and also the best way to get rid of shame is to name it, to call it out, to share it with somebody else, and then not be judged for it. That's the key. So where in the church can we share with one another and trust that we're not going to be judged? That someone will instead understand and say, oh, I struggle with that too, or I hear what you're struggling with, and I want to assure you that we still love you and we still care about you. I don't know.
That's really important work. Especially just as I was looking at the posts that I found where people were talking about shame and how they had experienced it. I mean, I really saw the ways that as you mentioned, like there are sometimes deep wounds that are there from those kind of experiences, and so and I saw less stories from people who were saying like that they had experiences in the church where they were able to be released from that shame in one way or another. So that would definitely be really important for the church to be doing. Yeah. So the next post we're looking at kind of fits into this theme of talking about shame. This one comes from the subreddit Christian, and the title is God's Judgment Terrifies Me. God's judgment terrifies me, and maybe that's the point. Standing before a holy and mighty God when I'm just a sinner puts everything into perspective. I fully believe in Jesus Christ and have accepted him as my Lord and Savior. But I still struggle with sin just like everyone else. I'm sure there are sins I'm not even aware of, and there are things I wrestle with, unsure if they are a sin or not. I do try to stay away from sin, especially when it's clearly sin, but even with that, something that weighs on me is this. What if I'm not sharing the gospel enough? What if I'm not using the talents he gave me the way he wants? What if I'm not loving my neighbor enough? What if I'm not kind, forgiving, or helpful enough? I don't want to disappoint God, and I definitely don't want to enter eternity separated from him. How terrifying is his judgment. May God have mercy on us as sinners. So this person is really expressing a fear of not being good enough for God, and in this fear of God's judgment.
Yeah, that fits so much into the conversation about shame. So I kept hearing not enough, not enough, not enough. Those are shame words. And that is the chronic, severe shame that I was saying can be really unhealthy. So my response to this person, if I was like their spiritual director.
And that's the hope here, because I know we've talked a little bit about sin on the podcast before, but it was more in like how do we theologically understand sin? And I wanted to pose this question to you as a campus pastor, as a pastoral leader. Like when someone is coming to you with this sort of mindset, with saying these things, like how would you respond to them?
So I would definitely listen. I mean, hearing that out, again, people need to name that if that's what they're feeling. I I would be very curious to understand where that comes from. Are they going to a church that has taught the judgment of God in a, really severe, strong, like that's the constant theme? That's not the theology I would lead with as a pastor. But I know that it exists. I know that this is a really strong stream, especially in American Christianity, I think. So, but I'd also wonder whether they felt judgment from their parents, because often our understanding of God is shaped by the key figures in our life. And so if their parents were super judgmental, then that would, to me, indicate there's maybe some help that counseling could give as well. So the other thing that struck me as I was hearing you say this was the fear. The fear of God is so strong. And so my response after listening, I would hope that I could help them to think about the dominant message throughout the Bible of do not be afraid, do not fear. That refrain comes up throughout all of the Bible. And so if God's messengers are constantly saying, don't be afraid, then a fear-based faith is not God's intention for us. And I know there are biblical passages that can support the judgment of God, the vengeance of God. I'm very aware of those passages. But I think the overarching arc of the Bible leads us to a there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. And so how do we move towards a God who is loving rather than vengeful? How do we move away from a fear-based faith? Fear is so incredibly pervasive in our culture today. Our whole political systems are based on making people afraid of what they'll lose, afraid of the other, afraid of not being treated fairly. And so fear is a huge motivator.
Yes, absolutely.
To, again, manipulate people.
Right.
Because if you can get someone afraid, you have power over them. Now, if we move to a place where our dominant response is not fear, then we aren't just thinking about ourselves all the time. We can start to think about the other. We can start to say, what is the call to me here? What's the invitation to reach out to someone else, to help someone else, all of those things. And we move toward the kind of faith that Jesus describes, of love of stranger, love of enemy. You can't love your enemy if you're so soaked in fear.
Right.
So choosing not to be afraid or moving toward that, at least, reminding ourselves of that, it's not easy.
Right.
But to position ourselves to refuse to be led by fear. So my heart breaks for this person because I would not, I would not find that kind of a faith life-giving. That's not the abundant life that Jesus wants us to have.
Right. And I think, one of the points you made that I want to emphasize more is just like, if God is calling us to do these things, so, this person names some of those things like sharing the gospel, using the talents that God gave, loving our neighbors enough, being kind, forgiving, and helping others. If we are to do all of those things, then, if God's role is to be giving us a spirit of fear, it's hard to do both of those things at the same time. And so operating and knowing, living in God's love and appreciating and remembering God's love. That's really motivating us more and filling us with what we need to be doing what God has called.
Yeah.
And I also have seen the way that more thinking on the sin side and often looking more about what we shouldn't be doing, I feel like when fear's the one in charge, sometimes that ends up in directions of sin and operating out of fear. I mean, operating out of fear isn't healthy either. And so, I mean, we see these examples of vengeance and judgment in the Bible, but when we really, like you said, like when we really do see it holistically, it's we can see that our faith and our life can be driven by God's love, and that's truly what can help us to be living into these things that the poster has described.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I hope they have someone who can really listen deeply and help them move out of the shame, out of the fear, out of the I'm not enough, into something more abundant than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's more we could say about that, but I do want to get to our last question here. This one is coming from a new subreddit we haven't looked at, which is the subreddit religion. And I definitely want to take more questions from this subreddit because it's just very interesting the way that people are talking about, someone will ask a question that's related to theology, related to their own faith, and there's people from a lot of different religions that are responding. So this poster, their title is, Does God Punish People Through Chronic Illness? Hey, I have a few chronic conditions that I've dealt with for a couple of years now. I have a lot of anxiety over them getting worse or just having a flare-up. Just here for some reassurance as the internet is giving me mixed answers. Would God punish me by making a medical condition worse or having me go through a flare-up? Or is this not something God does? A lot of people say that he doesn't punish us, but a few say he does. I've dealt with a lot of intrusive thoughts and worry that he'll punish me by making me sicker. Anybody have any advice? Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's also kind of related.
It is also related. As I was reading that, I'm seeing, some similar ideas about, I mean, there's a fear of God in this too.
Right.
Yeah.
And a sense that the mix of perspectives that exists, right? There's like this tension between those who want to make God into a judging God or want to accentuate God as a judging God who punishes through whatever circumstances of our life versus those. I would include myself in the group that does not see illness as judgment. I think illness is part of the brokenness of humanity. We are all going to die at some point, and we are going to die from a variety of different causes. What feels really unfair is when we have to deal with illness for a very long time and it's really intrusive in our life, or when we face a serious illness before we feel like we've lived a full life. That's when these struggles, I think, really emerge in our faith, where we ask these questions. So 6.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with a disease that has no cure. And I chose to have a pretty aggressive treatment. I had a stem cell transplant, and that has put my disease in remission. But I live with the constant awareness that at any point my disease could come back. I might live 30 more years. I might live 2 more years. I don't know. I have to just go through life not knowing that. There's no, and there's no guarantee that I wouldn't die from something sudden as well. So how I responded to getting that news, I mean, I cried and I prayed Psalm 86, which is, God, I'm your servant, preserve my life, like that kind of bargaining with God almost of, I'm doing good things for you. Help me stay alive. So I understand that is a natural prayer to want healing, especially when we feel like, why is this interrupting me at a really productive time in my life? It's not when I've finished all the things I want to do.
Right.
But I have never thought of it as punishment. I have never had that thought. And so I would want to encourage this person to let go of that idea and just to say, we don't have the answers for these questions. But in the Bible, the story of Job is one that interrupts that older kind of assumption that good health will follow you if you're faithful,
right.
and blessings will be yours if you're faithful. And the story of Job is there, and then there's some things later, especially in the New Testament, that also counteract that say that's not the only faithful interpretation of illness or bad things that happen. I have been really helped by Kate Bowler's work. I was reading that she was going through her illness just before mine. And so her books were just landing at a really helpful time for me to know how to handle some of those little thoughts that just kind of float around. And do bad things happen to good people?
Right.
Yes, bad things sometimes happen to good people. And this is not, and it doesn't even have to be about whether you're good or bad. Illness just happens.
Right.
And so, I would hope that this person can lay to rest the sense of fear that God is going to make the illness worse because of something they have done.
Yeah. And the one other question I want to ask kind of related to this, because there's some talk about this in the comments. Someone kind of like poses the question then, it was actually someone who was commenting and really saying like, no, disease isn't a punishment from the gods or some sign of cosmic displeasure. Disease and disorders are ultimately a roll of the dice and don't care about morality. And if you live long enough, eventually everyone will roll a one. Viruses, bacteria, parasites, genetics, and environmental factors don't care if you go to church or sing in the choir, or if you are saving puppies or caring for the sick. Getting sick means you got sick and may need treatment and condition management, nothing more. And one of the comments in response was, which I don't have the exact wording written down, but it was really asking like, well, if God's role in this isn't punishment, then what is it?
Oh.
What is it at all? Is there a role at all? Or I mean, where is God's place when things like this are happening?
That's super important to follow up with that question.
Yeah.
So for me, God's role is in standing with us. And again, that's what we teach about why Jesus came, is Jesus entered into human existence in order to share our humanity. And so we can trust that God is standing with us through whatever bad experiences we go through. And I deeply relied on my faith through this time. I knew many people were praying for me, and it wasn't so much like, if I get this many people to pray for me, then I'll be healed. It wasn't necessarily that. It was, I have this circle, a community of people around the world, literally, who are joining me in my prayers that God will be made known to me, in me, through me, all of that. So I would say God does have a really important role, and that is being beside us, comforting us when we need comfort, strengthening us when we need strength. I do believe God has healing capabilities, but I don't understand how some people are healed and some are not. I don't think it's based on whether they have a strong enough faith or not. But I do believe that there is the power of healing, and God works through doctors. God works through the medical system. So for me, God was very important. My faith became kind of that thing that I could just lean on. And the faith community, definitely. And they still, I still can go to them and say, celebrate with me. Yeah. I just celebrated a year since, the last year. And I know that many people still remember me in prayer.
Yeah.
So that's been really important for me. And I think until you have experienced that kind of presence, like, again, it comes back to what can we be as supportive fellow travelers?
Right.
How can we be there for people going through these really difficult times and assure them, one, you're not alone. You're never alone.
Yeah. And I really like what you've said here, kind of in combination with what you said earlier, because there is this sense of your faith being an incredibly important part of this experience, and really leaning into God and leaning into the people that are around you. And you also named that there were times you were asking, like why is this happening to me if I'm doing the work of God? And I think it's important to let OP know. I mean, they said that they deal with a lot of intrusive thoughts and worry that they'll be punished by being made sicker if they're doing something wrong. And I think I would want this person posting to know that, asking these kind of questions and really wondering why is this happening? Asking God, why is this happening to me? Why is this something I'm experiencing? That's not a bad thing. And I think having that mix of really relying on God to get you through something, but also being able to be frustrated with God when that feels necessary too, and that God isn't going to respond to that frustration with some sort of punishment. And we see that a lot in the Psalms and in other places in the Bible. And so I really like that just that reality of we can really experience the full range of emotions.
Yes.
When something like this happens, and like you said, God is there through all of it.
Yeah.
And standing beside us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think God weeps with us. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of people who it's really important for them to sense that God is in control. But I'm okay not knowing how God is working all of this out. I don't need to say, oh, God's got a purpose for this.
Yeah.
I think that for me, it's I don't have to figure out what that purpose is that God has for this. I don't know if God has a purpose for it. I think for me personally, the question is, what am I going to do with the life I am given? And how am I going to use the time that I am given? And so, for me, it's choosing to live as fully as I can with the time I'm given. And to use my gifts the way I can to, starting a doctor of ministry program was really kind of my way of saying, I'm going to live and I'm going to take advantage of this time that's been given to me. I want to learn more. I want to keep growing. Rather than just I'm waiting for the next medical test to come back and putting everything on pause because I don't know. No, none of us know. So live fully.
Yeah.
Embrace life. Serve God. That's kind of what I've chosen to do.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah. So as we finish up today, are there any particular takeaways you have just from listening to what people on Reddit have to say about some of these questions and grievances that they've brought?
I think the thing that strikes me is just how heartbreaking some of, like, these pleas for understanding and pleas for someone to listen and assure me that I'm okay.
Yeah.
And wow. Do they have other places where they can do that? I mean, this is a really important avenue for some people, I think, because we know a lot of people don't have a community that they feel is safe to share these ideas or questions with.
Right, absolutely.
So, yeah, that's what strikes me, is just how profoundly deep and moving and painful some of the stuff being expressed is.
Yeah. I mean, I will say some of these questions and stories that I come across, there's people saying, I'm telling this story here, I'm asking this question here because I don't feel like there's anyone I can talk to in my real life. So I feel like that really kind of invites us then to, I mean, in leadership as the church, to be making sure there's space for that and providing room for people to be able to tell their stories and to ask those tough questions. And I mean, create spaces, kind of going back to the idea of shame, creating space where they are not worried about being shamed for having those particular stories or questions and being open spaces to be asking them. Because, I mean, Reddit's been a great resource for a lot of people because, I mean, especially I would say the subreddit Christianity, there is a lot of support and there are some very compassionate answers that are given in response to these stories. But, I mean, having people that are supportive in real life is really important too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thanks for giving me a deeper picture into what happens there. I mean, it's just really remarkable that like we can come together and just have a conversation about somebody else's question. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us here and giving some of your insights and responding to some of these, I mean, heartbreaking and also some of them being very insightful questions and stories that they've brought here. Yeah. And thank you for watching or listening. If you enjoyed, please leave a like or a positive review. If you have any themes or questions you would like us to focus on or stories you would like us to respond to, please leave that in a comment. You can find Seminary Reacts on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Have a great week. Bye.